All right, cool. I'm just going to get started. And if people come in, just like ignore the dinging sound in the background. All right, so welcome. This is Vital, and we're going to be hosting a healthcare consulting co-op panel today with three wonderful panelists who are currently doing healthcare consulting co-ops. And I know it's a niche, but hopefully you're all super interested in it. And if you're not, you're going to learn a little bit more about it today. And so the main point of the reason we're having this is because currently our newest arm, which is Vital Ventures Consulting, is accepting applications and they actually close tomorrow. And I'm sure our co-directors will be talking a little bit more about it later. But basically, it's a pro bono consulting group and you'll be working with a real client, so a real company. And this project will take place over the summer, so for about 8 weeks. And if you're at all interested, then feel free to stay and chat with our co-directors after. There's also a bunch of information on our Instagram. And if you have any questions, like feel free to put them in the chat at any point and we'd be happy to answer them kind of throughout our co-op panel today. And we're going to send the application link in our chat, as well as it's in our Instagram bio already if you are interested in kind of seeing what the application looks like. And with that, these are our co-op panelists for today. So I'm going to just, on the order that's on the screen, I'll just have you guys go through and kind of just say the basics about yourself, your year, your major, any minors, and if you've had any previous co-op positions, those, as well as your current one, if this is your first or current. So Nirban, go ahead.
Yeah, hi guys, my name is Nirban. I'm a third year studying health science and minoring in business analytics. And I had a co-op before this, working with Mega actually at Milliman in a healthcare analytics role. And now I'm part of McKinsey's newly formed social sector, healthcare, and public sector entities team.
Hi guys, I'm Amanda. I'm a fourth year health science and business administration major with a concentration in healthcare management and consulting. My first co op was at Beth Israel. I worked in the Office of Improvement and Innovation as a management engineer. And now I'm working at IQVIA, which is in the US Market Access Strategy Consulting Office as an associate, just consulting, healthcare consulting, which is why I'm here. Yeah.
Hi everyone, I'm Mega. I'm a junior majoring in finance and math. I'm currently working as a co-op at Willis Towers Watson in their health and benefits consulting division. And like Nirvan said, last year I co-opted at Milliman Consulting, and that was in Windsor, Connecticut in their health office.
Awesome, thank you. All right, so I'm going to stop sharing so that you guys are all able to see everyone. So we're just going to go through, run through some questions. And if at any point anyone in the audience has any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. And we'll also kind of have a more designated Q&A section at the end in case like you want to leave them until then. So kind of first, like a very broad question is what interests you specifically about healthcare, or kind of why you decided to become more involved in the more healthcare consulting aspect versus just like the more business end? We can start with Nirvan and kind of move through everyone.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think in healthcare, the one biggest draw was making an impact on people's lives and helping them live healthier and better every day. And I could have definitely gone down a clinical route, especially because I came in wanting to be a psychiatrist and soon realized that the pre-med route wasn't for me. And I think with healthcare consulting specifically, you have a certain level of autonomy, whereas you can work on projects you're interested in, and especially within firms, like there's rooms to grow and engage with different clients, but also continue to work towards that mission of either making your client better or making the end users or the patients better through the strategy and work that you put in.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with Nirban. Like for me, I was always interested in healthcare, but wasn't really sure like what I wanted to do with it. And similarly, I kind of was like, oh, do I want to be a doctor? Do I want to work in the clinical route? But for me, I thought the healthcare system itself was super complex and really interesting. So when I worked in a hospital for my first co-op, it was in the improvement sector, and it was really, really fun, and really interesting. But in consulting, I think there's so much more data and resources. So the problems you tackle with clients are like way bigger and have a much larger impact than like in small systems like a hospital or things like that. So that was what really drew me to healthcare consulting. But healthcare itself, I mean, it's like a way to help people. I think everyone does healthcare to help people. So that was one of the initial draws. But consulting specifically, I think you can make such a big impact in consulting.
Yeah, kind of along the same lines. I did not know I wanted to go into healthcare when I started off as a freshman here. I joined as a finance and math major. I thought I'd go into like asset management or something along the lines of that. And during my first co-op, I kind of did it as a whim. But I was really just drawn to how dynamic healthcare was. I mean, as I'm sure we all know, especially in the past year, like it's constantly evolving and constantly changing. And so along with that, like the work you do just never stays the same. It's just extremely dynamic in every way. No two projects are the same, no two clients are the same. And I think I was just drawn to that in general, just how fast paced it was. So that's what has kept me in this field.
Awesome. So I guess kind of a little bit based off of that, just for like background on yourselves, are any of you pre-med or planning on going down that route, or are you guys kind of more based in the other direction? Our club is more interdisciplinary, so we have people from like all different realms. So kind of off of that question as well, what kind of other healthcare experience have you all had? Anyone can take it, or Nirvan, you can start again.
All right, cool. Yeah, great. I think outside of this consulting space, I think I've done more like research in the public health and population health space. And I think that's definitely been interesting because when you look at healthcare, like it's great to have a good business mindset, but you also need to understand certain, problems or issues that folks might be facing that you won't see on paper or can't necessarily be quantified. So I think that was definitely rewarding and has shown me a different perspective. But there's also a whole nother component that, Megan and I got into, which is the data piece that, drives all of this healthcare. So that was also very interesting to work with.
Yeah, for me, I'm not pre-med or anything. But working in a hospital, I mean, the main concern is like patient care, and like it's a very direct angle. So I worked at Beth Israel in the Office of Improvement Innovation. It was a wonderful co-op. They unfortunately like had to end it because of the COVID. Like I got laid off, the program's completely canceled. But I loved it because it was a very direct view of patients. I worked directly with doctors and providers. So you really got to saw your impact on a smaller scale. Like we did improvement projects on the surgery side of things, and that was an amazing experience. With healthcare consulting, again, it's like much like a bigger picture stuff. But I think one thing that I really love about it is it's always about like the patient at the end of the day, which is a big contrast to maybe other consulting where it's about finance and more like money motivated. I think healthcare you have to be somewhat like selfless and somewhat caring about others, which is why it makes such a great place to work. Also, where I work is like everyone at the end of the day is like very good teammate and also very much oriented towards helping patients and clients. So that was my experience.
Yeah, like I said earlier, I'm definitely not pre-med at all. Um, but I have worked in healthcare consulting before, and I've specifically worked in insurance, health insurance. So I've also done like life insurance and property and casualty. And out of all of those, health insurance was definitely the one that I was most drawn to, just because, like Nirvana and Amanda said, it's all about helping people. You're able to see the impact that you make more clearly. And it's just overall like a really meaningful thing to do and spend your time doing. So that's why I've stuck with it.
Great. So yeah, that kind of like you guys as panelists kind of really represent Vital's mission in general, because we really like to push that like we're healthcare, and often people kind of associate healthcare with like being pre-med, and you guys are just a key example that it's available in a lot of different forms. So thank you for touching on all of it. Kind of moving more into like your current positions. I know that you're all currently on co-op, but what kind of projects have you worked on so far, and what's been your favorite one, or if you are looking forward to one that's coming up?
Great. I guess we're going back in order. So yeah, I think one of the coolest things is that the team that I work on intersects the public sector, but also traditional healthcare. So traditional healthcare is, working with payers and providers, so hospitals, insurers, and then everything in between, from looking at like healthcare transactions, digital health. And then the other side is like public health, global public health, and then also looking at the intersection between healthcare and government, which is what we call our public sector. So I think for me personally, a focus has been around digital health, just because of one of my personal interests. But I'm also looking to work with the public sector side on some more health equity and social determinants of health initiatives. So it's wide expanse of things I can do, but I'm just trying to narrow down and become more of a specialist over time.
Yeah, so for my healthcare consulting co-op, there's a really long training program, like it's a 4-week training program where they basically teach you everything you need to know. And it like teach you SQL, Excel, PowerPoint, and they really go in depth about the data set. So at IQVIA where I work, they're known as like the human data science company, and they just have so much access, so much data. And specifically, we work with like pharmaceutical companies. And that was actually a concern of mine when I first joined. Is like, oh, but like pharma is bad. Like that was kind of my like idea of what pharmaceutical was. But in reality, like it's not actually like that. And what we do a lot of work on is actually seeing what price to put for patients to lower their out-of-pocket cost. So right now I'm working in the diabetes market and helping one of our like manufacturers figure out what price is best for patients and how to lower it to a cost that'll make them profitable, but also at the same time make it accessible for patients. And it's like super interesting. So much data to work with at my company, which I love, and it's like super fascinating. But yeah, it's really interesting working with the pharmaceutical side of things and getting a viewpoint of like, oh, it's not all bad. It's actually can be really good. So it's fun.
Yeah, so Willis Towers, essentially what we do as a company, or what my division does, is we help companies provide employee and health benefits for like the following calendar year. So there's just a lot of components that go into that, and a lot of it is just pure like data science numbers crunching, which I really enjoy. It's what I did my last co-op somewhat, and it's what I'm continuing to do. And it kind of varies in terms of like what specific projects we work on. There are so many components that go into planning what benefits are going to be offered. So right now, for instance, I'm working on like disruption analysis. So if a company is providing their employees with like a certain vendor for like the current calendar year, and they're planning on switching it next calendar year, how many people are going to be impacted by it? Like how many people are no longer going to have access to like in-network providers? And based off of that information, we make recommendations to our clients and say like, hey, maybe you shouldn't do this. Maybe you should spend more money on this, all that kind of stuff. And it's also another thing I really like about my co-op is that it's also pretty finance heavy, which works out well being a finance major. So a lot of the times we have to just calculate, like, even though they might want to offer this dental benefit and this vision benefit and all these kinds of great things for the employees, it might not work into their budget. So we oftentimes provide like financial benchmarking where we show them how their benefits like rank in comparison to other companies in their industry. And then also say like, maybe if you offer this, like you won't be able to cover it. It's not coverable in your budget. Maybe you should, spend less on this, spend more on this. So there's so many different facets that go into making these recommendations. And a good amount of it is just, data and numbers crunching, but also a lot of it is just strategy, using like common sense, knowledge of the industry, which is really fascinating because, this is only like my 7th month working in healthcare in general in life. And there are people who have been in the industry for like 20, 30 years. So being able to see like what they bring and like all the industry knowledge that they bring to the table and kind of being able to just like absorb all that information has been really great.
You guys are making me want to do healthcare consulting. All of those fields are super interesting. And I guess like a question for, I don't know how much background everyone has on how healthcare consulting kind of works in terms of projects. So if any of you want to kind of touch on how your company does it, because I know sometimes some companies are like, you work on a certain project with a certain group and then you kind of move to another. I don't know if any of yours are kind of like that, but if you guys want to touch on how either for your current or if any past experiences that you've had have been like that or how yours is different or what you would typically find, because you all are the experts of this. Feel free to kind of touch on that. Any of you can go. It doesn't have to be in a certain order.
Yeah, I can go talk a little bit. So at IQVIA, in the US Market Access Strategy Consulting Office, it's a pretty big office of 200 people. And the way it works is there's associates and then associate consultants, consultants, managers, principals, and senior principals. And on each project, there's usually one of the higher ups each, and then one or two of the lower. So you really get to work with like a huge range of people in different positions, and you all focus on one project from one client. And principals are the ones who usually have relationships with one client. So they usually work on all accounts for Pfizer, all accounts for one pharmaceutical company. And whereas the lower you get, the more varied the projects you are. So usually the lower you are, you have like 2 or 3 projects at a time. And they're usually all centered around pharmaceutical stuff. And you work with new people probably every like 8 weeks, I would say, depending on how long a project is, like 8 weeks to a year. So it's really interesting because you get a lot of projects done over like your co-op. Like I would say I'll probably have like 6 to 8 projects under my belt by the time I finish my co-op, which is like really awesome. And you work with a ton of people. Like your projects are all different people from all across the company. Like it really is varied depending on what your expertise is. But the lower you are, like as an associate, I'm like the lowest on like that type of hierarchy. So I will really get a lot of exposure. Whereas the higher you get up, the more expertise you gain, the more kind of specified you are to one client, one type of analyses. So for my co-op, you definitely get so much variety with project work. And as you move up, it kind of goes more into one channel as you figure out what you really like doing and what you're good at.
Yeah, at Willis Towers, we also have kind of a similar system where it's like different projects all at once. So normally people get placed on about 5 client teams at one time, and you're just doing different projects for each of the client teams all simultaneously. So it's great in that, you know, you're getting so much exposure in the span of a short amount of time, but it's also something that like, yeah, you know, I had to learn like time management like really quick. So it's really easy to get like overwhelmed with projects, and you know, it's a little hard to like stay like on top of what comes next, like what deliverables due like, you know, this week or next week, and like what should be prioritized in what order. But then it's also great, like, so each client team varies in size depending on the client. My smallest team is 3 people, and my biggest team is about 15, 20 people. And the clients also like vary drastically. So some of them are, I work with like one of the clients that we have is a private university. Another one is a defense company. Another one's a pharmaceutical company. So it kind of varies all over the place, and we're providing benefits for all different types of companies, which is really great. You get to see like what their priorities are depending on their industry, and basically like fit our recommendations and projects based off of those priorities, which is nice. But it's been really interesting working in like smaller teams and bigger teams, and you kind of get to figure out like what you like more. And over the course of my co-op, like as I get added onto more teams and get more exposure, I'll be able to, you know, be like, oh, I prefer smaller teams, I prefer bigger teams, which is really nice. And my co-op's been great in like helping me customize my experience to what I'm looking to get out of it.
Yeah, I guess my experience is a little different. So the way McKinsey's structured is there's one branch of, you might have heard of like partners, associate partners, business analysts, associates, that whole branch. So they're primarily the ones that do all the external consulting with the clients. And so the thing is with our consultants, they're not specialized in an industry. They might have more experience and end up working more in an industry, but a lot of them will come from, you know, very strict business backgrounds, or, you know, very diverse backgrounds. So we don't really have specific assignment like that because we have this other branch, which is called capabilities and insights. So that's the team that I work on. So within capabilities and insights, we have different teams that are basically called knowledge teams. So what we are the folks that are specialists in all the content. So for me personally, I'm on the healthcare systems and services team right now. And on a day-to-day for us, we get like emails and like requests from different consultants all across the world about different problems they're having with their clients and some kind of information that they might need, some sort of data analysis, could be anything. So I think in that way, it's really interesting. Like I've had to get up for calls with Japan. I mean, I've talk to people, in the Middle East and, all around. It's really interesting to meet people and learn from their experiences, especially because, healthcare in Japan is so different than what it is here. Um, but I think in that sense, I'm not necessarily interacting with the clients myself, but I do know that, if I'm touching 10 projects in a certain day, if I take on 10 requests, then I know I'm, either making some sort of smaller impact, but, getting more of a flavor of other things that are out there.
Yeah. So I know you guys kind of briefly touched on this, like talking about the projects that you've been working on, but what's a skill that you've acquired really quickly? So I know Mega, you said time management, or one that you kind of wish that you had known that would have been like a very major thing that you would need going into this kind of field.
I can take that one. I think the biggest thing that I've learned is to not be fearful of reaching out to other people. I think there are folks that have, tenure of 20, 30 years, but are very open to helping you grow and spending time to actually explain processes to you and how to use databases or understand things. Um, so I think, especially in a firm that's basically an ocean, I think it's been helpful over time for some folks to, initially prod me, but now I'm more comfortable reaching out and setting up meetings and trying to set up initiatives for myself. And I think overall that's just really appreciated throughout.
Yeah, that I think similarly with me. I think like being inquisitive and asking questions, like they're never gonna be mad. Like they keep saying to us at my firm, like we're all there's a bunch of new hires and three of us are co-ops and the rest of us are actually like new full-time associates, some of which have graduated from Northeastern. And their biggest thing for like the hiring process and the learning process, like ask questions, don't be afraid to ask. Especially when it's virtual and you can just ask a simple question. It's a lot harder to like ping someone or just like text them. It's a lot harder to do that. So knowing that like I have to go out of my comfort zone and ask questions. But on a technical basis, I think SQL was a big technical skill that I wasn't expecting to have to use, but it's huge at my like co-op role. Like it's basically what co-ops do, like I'd say like half the time, and then put it into Excel and then put it into slides basically. So if you guys can learn SQL, go do that. And then just being a team player. I think it's all client work's about being good teammates. So I think if you can show that in an interview and also in the actual job, you'll be an asset on that team. And hopefully maybe you could get hired. Who knows? But yeah.
Yeah, like I said earlier, I would say the two biggest things for me personally, time management and task prioritization. I feel like that's really important in any consulting role, like healthcare or otherwise. The best part about consulting is the fact that like everything just goes fast and like you just have a lot of things on your plate at the same time. So that's just something that I feel like would be good to pick up earlier rather than later. And then like Nirvana and Amanda said, like communication is a really big one. At Willis Towers, they really stress like if you have too much going on or if you have too little going on, like you have to talk to your team members. It's really they're really big on like splitting up tasks and like everyone helping out, which is really great because at times it can get overwhelming for sure. But having that company culture of like asking a lot of questions, vocalizing like how much time you have or how much time you don't have, that all like really helps and like creates like a really healthy work environment, I'd say.
Yeah, those are definitely all skills that are important for any job. So even if you're not planning on joining consulting, I can attest that I've been on 2 co-ops. Those are all very useful except for SQL. Amanda, would you mind going into what SQL is?
Yes. So I didn't know what SQL was until I started my co-op, and that also wasn't a requirement. They teach you how to use it, but basically it's like a type of like coding, and like I'm not a coder at all. I'm like health science and business. So I like took an R programming course over the summer last year when I was bored during COVID. So that was the only like basis of knowledge I had. And basically it pulls data from like our data sources in a way that like creates a table that you can then put in Excel and analyze data. So you basically write code to create the table that you want to find and pull the data you want to find in order to analyze it in Excel and make a decision. So that's really complicated. So I'll give an example. So if I want to look at patient activity in the diabetes market from this time frame, looking at specifically copay card use in this product, I have to write code to specify like which product, like copay card flag, all this stuff, and then that eventually pulls out a nice little table that I can analyze. That's the gist of it.
Nirvana or Mega, do either of you use anything similar or anything that's like different than what you would know like kind of going in or you thought you needed to know going in?
Yeah, so we don't use SQL or any kind of like language like that at my co-op. They're mostly very like Excel focused. So I've had to learn how to use macros and all that kind of stuff. But which hasn't been like terribly difficult, which is really nice. And like, again, like I said, everyone's like super helpful and like teaching whatever you need to know. I'd say for me personally, the bigger obstacle I had was just like knowing basic healthcare terms. I'd never taken a health science class in college ever. So just like knowing like basic terms that I'm sure most of you, if you've taken health science classes or any health related classes, you'll probably know. I had to spend so much time like looking stuff up, especially like whenever they had like random abbreviations thrown out. I was like literally writing them down during meetings and then looking it up later. But I would say that was like the biggest learning curve like I personally had was like just knowing all these kind of terms and all the healthcare lingo that people just casually throw around in meetings and don't bother explaining.
Yeah, I think SQL has definitely been a tool that I've actually started to get into at Milliman. Haven't really used as much of it here. I use more Excel, a lot of pivot tables. That's good. That's a good skill to know. Even though some firms might tell you that pivot tables are terrible, they're still your best friend, especially in huge data sets. But there are also these really cool databases that have, like, for example, like provider data. So it could have a bunch of data on hospitals, or also databases that are more payer data. So I'm sure these are terms that Megan now knows. But I think just like being able to maneuver through those databases and learn how to use tools to quickly pull data or market insights, it's also been really interesting.
Kind of on that same vein, are there any resources that you wish you had access to or exposure to before you got started? Like it could have to do with like the cases themselves or their projects or just like in general. But I asked kind of as a plug to our consulting arm because that is kind of what we aim to do. But if like someone like me is interested in consulting, like what would you recommend doing or like thinking about before kind of going into an interview or trying to apply to this position?
I can take this one. I think the beauty of consulting is you really don't have to really do anything special getting into it. You just have to be willing to adapt and be a problem solver. I think it's just those two. It doesn't matter what industry you've been in, whether you're an engineer by trade, could be a scientist. It really doesn't matter. I think as long as you're willing to um, just learn and contribute in a way where you are taking on responsibilities you can take, um, but also open to dealing with uncomfortable environments, because a lot of times like you'll get client requests that you just don't know how to do. So I think that's the biggest thing. I think it's the mindset. It's not even about the content or the background.
Yeah, going after Nirvana, I think it is really important to be willing to learn and adapt. Like every day is a new day, every project is different. But some things I think in my experience really helped with this job was first of all like getting experience like working with teams. I feel like in college that's very natural, but like doing that. And then also problem solving. They in my interview they asked a case question, which is like really common in consulting firms, is they ask you like, okay, how many like rounds of golf are played in a year in the United States? And in order to answer that, you're like, well, like what season is it? And there's like a bunch of things you can find on the internet. So first, if you're interested in specifically consulting, make sure you go through some of those questions um, online, find a friend, and just make sure you think of all the considerations, because in consulting, you really do think about all the things that are affecting your data and like what's affecting the client problem. I'm just showing you can think basically outside the box and also just take into consideration. And then one specific thing I think for healthcare consulting that helped me so much was there's a class in Northeastern. It's like Management 3340. It's like healthcare management consulting. I forget the name of it. It's the Dr. Hoff. So if you're really interested in healthcare consulting, yeah, Dr. Hoff. Megan and I took that class together actually, and that class really helped me figure out that I wanted to go into healthcare consulting and healthcare management. So plug Dr. Hoff, plug Management 3340 healthcare consulting class.
Yeah, I don't think there's any skills or resources in particular that I think I should have gone in with. Like Nirban said, like you learn so much on the job itself. They don't really expect you to come in knowing a lot. And like Amanda mentioned earlier, like they'll teach you like SQL, they'll teach you any kind of like data language that you need to know, especially when you're going in as a co-op. So I wouldn't say to like stress out a lot about like trying to, you know, learn a bunch of things in advance, because also healthcare consulting is a pretty broad field. Like no two healthcare consulting jobs are the same. So what skills you may need from one might be totally different than the skills you might need for another. But yeah, like they said, just being able to keep an open mind, being able to adapt and learn quickly. I'd say that's probably the biggest asset you're going to have going into healthcare consulting.
My next question, Amanda kind of touched on a little bit, but how were your interviews, and what would you say like was like, I don't want to say the scariest part, but like what did you find like the most difficult to kind of do? Because I know everyone's interviews can be different and every company is different, but if you guys wanted to touch on your experiences.
Yeah, I can take this one just because I talked a little bit about it. But for me, like I applied on good old NU Careers, and I actually was abroad when I did my interview, but it was like a virtual interview, as most interviews are. And like I did it like 7 o'clock at night in my little dorm room, and it was actually surprisingly less scary than I thought it was. For me, I like really knew I wanted this co-op, so I found a connection on LinkedIn who actually was working full time at IQVIA, and I messaged him because he worked at my old co-op, Beth Israel, and I was like, hey, like, can I talk to you about this like job? And I think that's a really good way to get information from someone inside like the company to see if you actually would like it. Maybe get some like inside resources like what the company works like and see if it's a good fit. And also like be able to show off that you like research the company in the interview, which I think shows like interest. And the first there was like two parts of it. One was like just a basic behavioral, like oh like why are you interested in this, and it was like really easy, just like basic questions for any interview. And then the second half was a 30-minute interview as a case study, and that was like similar to what I discussed earlier. I won't share the exact question they asked me because like I don't know if they do it every year, but it is similar to like how many rounds of golf are played in the United States in a year. Walk me through it. And basically you have like, well, like what season is it? Like this many people play golf in like Florida. What state are we in? And like kind of walk through your process, and they can give you like numbers like, oh, well, like you can ask them questions and stuff, but they don't really care what your answer is. The main thing is they want to see your thought process. So that was the scariest part for me because I'd never done anything like that in my like life. So I was like, what the heck is this? But if you can like think through your like a process really well, that will help you succeed in that part of the interview.
Yeah, I didn't have a case study per se, but the first part of my interview was a 2 hour long like personal interview thing where it was 2 hours of just like, oh, like tell me a time that you worked in a team or tell me a time that you faced a challenge. And by like an hour and 45 minutes, I was wiped out. But it was really interesting. Like each 30 minutes focused on a different like asset that for walk. So it was like 30 minutes on teamwork, 30 minutes on like something else, etc. And so that was like the first round. And then I also had a basically kind of asking where they basically just tested like health insurance knowledge. It wasn't particularly difficult. It was things like, oh, like what's a deductible, what's a copay, how would you calculate co-insurance, like basic things like that. But they kind of just wanted to know that you've done a little bit of research beforehand, that you know like basics of health insurance. And they just asked like questions like, oh, if a client came to you with this problem, or if a client came and was upset, how would you deal with this issue? Kind of more like on the client interaction side, just to see that you're someone who can work internally and externally. So that it was 30 minutes on that, but then 2 hours on the behavioral interview side, which was interesting for sure.
Yeah, I think I guess more similar to Amanda, I had to go through two cases, which were kind of annoying. I mean, cases aren't like the most fun exercise, especially like if you have an interview at like 7 p.m. Um, but I think the interesting thing about our cases were that it wasn't just quantitative, like it wasn't just get me a number. It was more, I mean, there was a quantitative piece where you had to do calculations right on the spot as someone is just looking at you on Zoom. But I think the other piece was like thinking about the implications and like next steps. So how would one decision impact every other possible stakeholder or other mitigating factors. And I think that was really interesting because again, that's some serious thought right on the spot. But honestly, as long as you're thinking out loud and putting your best foot forward, just trying to show them like where you're headed, I think that's much better than just keeping it bottled up in fear of trying to say the wrong thing because we all make mistakes. And I think the greatest thing was that the folks that I work with very close, like on a day to day basis, are the ones that interviewed me. And I think that's just like the best moment when it's all said and done. You're like, oh my gosh, you guys are the ones that grilled me for an hour, but now I can just slack you anytime, and you're happy to help me with anything. So yeah, I think sometimes HR folks will do interviews independently of actual team members, but if you do get the opportunity to ask, it'd be good to ask like, hey, are you on the team that I'll be joining? I think that's always a good question when you're feeling things out.
Thank you. So I'm going to take a break from grilling you guys with questions and see if anyone else has any. I don't know where all of you stand, but if you are trying to apply in a position like this, then feel free to grill them for me. And you can like unmute yourself or you can put it in the chat, whatever you guys want, and I can read them out.
I have a question. So it's completely okay that you guys are like unsure about this, but like I was wondering if we look at healthcare consulting, how would we break it like into different branches and topics? So like just the common ones.
So I might need a little more clarification on that one. Are you yeah, you can go.
So I guess what are the major topics
Yeah,
or
yeah,
like the
totally.
major
That's good.
problems that you like or like yeah.
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think one is like this huge insurance component. Like there's like insurers are always looking to make their systems more efficient, trying to cut costs. I'm sure Megan can talk about this more. So there's always the insurer piece, but then there's also big providers, which are like hospital systems, healthcare systems, like big sharks like Kaiser, that'll want to come to you and say, hey, here's what we're trying to do, help us out with this. And then the other component are like some of these tech companies, that are trying to innovate in the space. So it could be digital health. They could be trying to do, I mean, digital health has a wide variety of stuff in, disease monitoring, care coordination, could be behavioral health, mental health stuff, um, anything. So I think there's quite a wide variety. And then I think what Amanda does is like on the border of traditional healthcare and more in the life sciences pharma space. So that's the other, deep end that you can jump into.
Yeah, I think Nirban did a great job at describing that. For me, like I honestly am so focused on like pharmaceutical life sciences and like traditional healthcare that I don't really know the full scope of healthcare consulting. But if you want to know more about specifically life sciences, like find me on LinkedIn and I can talk to you about it.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Hi, I have a question. So I actually did do a consulting internship, but I have a question about like what type of things that you do. So I know we did cover this in a way, but basically like during your projects, is it more focused on improvement? Like, for example, for my internship, it was mostly reducing wait time for patients in hospitals. So what do you guys usually do? Like an example of a project that you worked on?
I can start off. So it's kind of like a really wide variety of projects, to be honest. I feel like no two projects I do are the same, but a lot of like what I do is like budget analysis. So we do like quarterly variance and like monthly tracking for all of our clients, where basically we say like, oh, like these are how many people used like this certain benefit in the past month or so. And like this is how much it costed you, and this is how much we like allocated for that in the budget, and then basically seeing if they went over or under budget. So it's a pretty solid intersection between like healthcare and finance in a way, and we basically use like all that prior experience to project into the future and say, oh, like this past year you've been going like super under budget. Based off of that, here are our recommendations for next year. So that's just an example of one project that I do pretty consistently.
Thank you.
I also can touch on this. For mine, it's very much focused on like market access. And like my old co-op was definitely towards one goal of improvement, but I would say this co-op is different in the sense where like our clients come up with more of a question for us rather than even a goal. They're so purely confused. Like we don't know what's going on with this. We want to, or we want to launch a new product in this field, and we don't know how to do it. And so it's usually very, very broad questions. They don't really know what even direction they want to go in. And then we go and analyze the data, and the answers really do vary so much. So it really is like mostly just problem solving rather than like one way of improvement. It's more like finding answers to questions is basically the gist of like what I do, I guess.
Yeah, I think those are all really interesting, and I think I guess, tangentially touch on some of that stuff. I think personally for me, I work a lot on like competitive intelligence and helping like different systems or entities, come up with good innovative solutions that can let them be ahead of the curve. So, like one, I guess, like request that we just got on one of the client projects was, hey, this pandemic is possibly winding down. What kind of like digital health solutions can we start to integrate into our hospitals um, and systems so we can be at par with our competitors or even ahead. So that kind of takes knowing what the market feels like. So just knowing that information off the top of your head. I mean, there's plenty of sites you can just read about, read the news, like little things like that, and you finally start to like know like what's going on. So when someone says something to you, you can instantly go like, okay, like here are a couple things right off the bat, and then I'll do some more research and get back to you. But I think the bottom line of consulting is improvement. Like it's always like we're consulting for them, so their systems and processes can be more efficient, and most probably they can make more money. I think that's always the bottom line. So kind of a dog eat dog world, but definitely can't lose a sense of the humanity piece in healthcare when we're, chasing the profit at the same time.
Thank you, guys. This was great. Thanks.
Uh, I have a quick question, bouncing off that, Nirban, because that's exactly what I've been thinking too. Like, it is a dog eat dog kind of, let's just say, industry or world, but healthcare is supposed to be this like, like this like ray of sunshine. Let's just put it that way. How do you balance that? There has to be some kind of like moral dilemmas that you face, right? Whether that may be something that you do talk about or don't talk about. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's something that we see more common than not is when there are, certain consultants or partners that don't have experience in healthcare, and they come to us and they say, something super outrageous, like we want to cut all these features and benefits because we want to save cost. I mean, that's very like generic. Um, but us being the healthcare experts and knowledgeable on, all the components outside of just the business model, we can take that step right there and then and say, hey, like let's set up a call, and let's like try to understand what you mean, because a lot of times, when folks are trying to come up with a strategy, they just don't know or understand the best way to convey certain things. So that's often an issue. Usually we don't have individuals that are coming out of some sort of malicious intent, but I think it's like that's another big piece that we have to be aware of, is like we are providing all of the content and the expertise. So in that vein, we need to make sure that projects aren't going in the wrong direction, and there is that piece of actually making folks healthier, happier, and just doing well overall.
Yeah, kind of along those same lines. Like even unfortunately, like money does dictate everything. So it's hard to differentiate oftentimes. But that doesn't necessarily mean that, you're really neglecting people and like the health needs of the individual. Like for example, one of the projects that I've been working on for the past few weeks is one of our clients has realized that in part of their to make more of a diversity inclusion effort like for their company, they're starting to cover more fertility treatments to promote more women joining their company and create more to in general create a more inclusive environment, which is great. Like most companies don't cover fertility treatments, which is insane. Or if they do cover it, they cover it at the very bare minimum. So it's really interesting to see. So they, reached out to their employees and they were like, oh, like, what do you want to see increase in terms of benefits? What are your priorities? And they have implemented that. They've taken that into consideration. Now they come to us and they're like, oh, this is what our employees said they want to see. And now we get to, do all the numbers crunching and figure out how we can make that fit into their budget and how we can make that a reality for them. But I don't think that, necessarily having the whole like money dictating everything, that doesn't necessarily mean that people are getting neglected in the end. I think especially in like today's world where like, unfortunately healthcare costs are going up exponentially and there isn't a lot that can be done about it. You're still able to see like people make or employers Stowers like see employers make a conscious effort to accommodate and be cognizant of the needs of their employees.
Yeah, I can touch on this a little bit. So, like, when I joined this company, I was really worried about like the pharmaceutical companies because I feel like in my classes they're kind of painted as like this big enemy, and like they're raising prices against patients. So that was kind of like my viewpoint coming in. But honestly, like working with them, big clients, we work mostly on the market access side of pharmaceutical stuff, which is much more patient dependent than any other side of like pharmaceuticals. And so like patients are obviously cost sensitive, but everyone in my company, a lot of them are from like backgrounds in healthcare or science. And I feel like people who generally major or have experience in that definitely do or are more conscious of like patients. So one of like I think the IQVIA goals is like always keeping the patient first. And that's something I've seen like my managers do. But a lot of times, honestly, the clients do care about their patients and don't want to raise costs on them unless absolutely necessary because it is like you get a higher volume of patients at a lower cost bucket. That's actually to get you more money than fewer patients at a higher cost bucket because more patients with lower cost, whatever. So they actually want a lower cost, which I thought was very surprising. But yeah, definitely the healthcare consulting, it's interesting the balance of like making money and profit versus like healthcare being so patient oriented.
Yeah, those are great explanations. Thank you so much.
So a question we got in the chat is from Mandy, and she's asking, I know you guys kind of touched a little bit on your interviews, but could you go a little bit more in depth about how you prepared for your interviews, and in particular, like if you knew there was going to be a case portion, how you did that, or if you didn't, like kind of your thought process during?
Yeah, honestly, not too much. I think the one thing that I did look at was McKinsey's sample cases. I think you should look at those, Mandy. I think those are great practice for any firm. Um, and I think every firm honestly has something on their recruiting page that's like, here's what you need to know or good things to know for your interview. I think those are probably the resources to go to, but I don't think you should be burning your brain doing like millions of cases, because we're all still young. Like it's all still new experiences. I think we'll just learn over time. But I know there are websites that you can find cases on, but it's truly up to you and how serious you think it is.
For me, I'm the type of person who like over prepares for an interview, especially like a job I really want to get. So for this job, I was like super nervous because I had never worked in healthcare consulting. I had worked at a hospital. So for me, the case was the most scary part of it. But before that, again, I would reach out to someone if you know specifically one company or one job you really like. Try and find someone on LinkedIn and just be like, hey, like, can I talk to you for a little bit about your job? Like, there's like some prompts you can find online. I just knew a person who went to Northeastern, so it was more casual. Um, and then like talk to them, I'd say, and get some inside information and see if you actually like it. And then if you really want to do go into consulting, you like can look up case studies, but honestly, they know you're young, they know you're straight out of college. They're not expecting you to know every answer. But just showing you like to think through things and really care about the position and really are interested in this, I think they see potential in that versus like expecting to be perfect. So to show you really care and are interested, I think is the main takeaway, and try to research if you can about the company and case stuff.
Yeah, I'd say researching about a company is a really big one. Um, Interviewers love to hear about how much you know about what they do. And the more you aggrandize it and the more you make it seem like it's a really big deal, they love that. So just the more research you do, especially with healthcare consulting, I feel like a lot of times you'll know like, oh, they do healthcare consulting, but you won't actually be able to figure out what specifically they do. So the more specific information you can get, the better. If like, you know what kind of clients they work with, or if you know typically like what kind of projects they work on. Again, I'd agree with Amanda. Like if you could reach out to someone beforehand, that'd be great. I also reached out to the former co-op before my interview, and he was super helpful in just telling me like, oh, like I thought there would be a case study. He was like, no, there's no case study. So I was like, all right, feel a lot better. But he kind of just told me a little bit about what he does on a day-to-day basis, which really helped me like solidify my interest in the company, and I was able to communicate that interest during my actual interview, which was nice.
Thank you. We still have time for one more question if anyone has anything that they want to ask, any last.
I actually do. I was wondering, like, what kind of motivates you guys to be in this field?
That's a great question. For me, I didn't really know I wanted to do healthcare consulting until I took that class, Dr. Hoff, which I keep plugging, um, Management 3340, because I knew I wanted to work in healthcare because I really thought it was interesting, the healthcare system itself. And I think like I want to help people. That was like my idea with like getting a job in general. So healthcare also seemed to fit, but I think specifically consulting and healthcare was interesting because consulting itself is so project based and team based and super exciting work, which already in itself is super cool. But then healthcare in combination with that makes it cool project work. It's exciting in a field that actually helps people. And healthcare itself to me is really interesting. And it just makes me like there's so many components that are all interworking, and there's so much change going on now, especially with COVID. I think I just find it so interesting. There's so much room for growth in it. So that's why I was really interested in it.
Yeah, same thing here. Healthcare is just a field where you're able to help a lot of people and really see the impact that you make, which is a huge motivation itself. And then, it doesn't really hurt if you just love what you do on a daily basis. So a lot of times, I think the biggest motivating factor for me is the fact that I never really know what I'm going to be doing on a daily basis. What I did yesterday definitely isn't going to be what I'm doing tomorrow. So the fact that uncertainty and the fact that it's so fast paced and dynamic is probably one of my biggest motivators as well.
Yeah, I think we're all basically saying the same thing. I think healthcare has definitely been a personal um, passion of mine since I was an early age, probably. Just seeing, grandparents go through the healthcare system and struggle to some degree, and just seeing issues over time and, non-traditional ways, I think showed me that I wanted to be in healthcare. And I think finally being able to narrow it down to, an area where I love what I'm doing, but I'm also good at what I'm doing. I think that's kind of clicking for me now. It's a good thing because healthcare is at the forefront of everyone's mind, and we do have a lot of power. I mean, all three of us do to some degree have power to really change, the care or the quality of care um, that someone receives. So I think it's definitely a special field to be in.
Alrighty, thank you guys so much for being a part of our panel and answering all of our many questions. In the chat, I'm going to put the Ventures Consulting application. So if you are particularly like super interested now in healthcare consulting, or you just needed that little push, feel free to apply. Switching gears a little bit, on our last note, in addition to having a consulting arm, we also have a case competition. So I'm going to hand it off to Elisa, who's the director of our special events team and who is basically spearheading this entire competition right now. She'll talk a little bit more about it. So this is not mutually exclusive. You can apply to VVC and still be able to do this as well. So just keep that in mind, keep an open mind if this is at all interesting, but know that cases and consulting are very related.
Yeah, thank you. So hi, I'm Elisa. I lead the special events arm, and like Hinal said, it's not mutually exclusive, and this opportunity is also like not a huge commitment. So if it's something you want to try, if you're interested in the intersection of healthcare and consulting, and you want to get hands-on experience, you should definitely sign up for our Husky Health Innovation Challenge, which is going to be this March. So case competitions are actually super prevalent among MBA programs, and they also reflect a lot of similar concepts and questions to what you might see in consulting interviews and projects. And it'll give you a taste of like a short project sprint. So you'll get 1 to 2 weeks to develop a solution to a problem in healthcare that will be presented in the case. And then you'll address the case in teams of 3 to 4 students, which you can either form yourself or we will also be matching some teams. So our top 5 finalists will be mailed swag. We have a couple $1,000s in cash prizes for first, second, and third place. And then moving on to our sponsors, obviously it wouldn't be possible without them. They've helped us ground the case, make it as realistic as possible, and kind of relating back to the industry and what you might see in the real world. And our final pitch day as well will have a lot of opportunities to network with them. So your participation here will let you network closely with the sponsors on this list: ARP Innovation Labs, Accenture, Johnson & Johnson, a bunch of colleges within Northeastern, and also meet other attendees. And finally, we don't expect anyone to have any experience coming into this case. If you do, that's obviously great. But the point of this is really to bring in students across a variety of disciplines to many problems in healthcare that are obviously so inter and cross-disciplinary. So, whatever skills you bring will have value in this case. And to introduce some relevant concepts if you don't have as much experience, we're hosting a series of workshops starting next week, Thursday at 6 p.m., just our normal ViTAL meeting time. So our first workshop is going to be co-hosted with Scout, the design studio here on campus, so that we can discuss person-centered design in healthcare. And then we have an upcoming business workshop with CASE, the consulting club on campus, in March, as well as some other events coming up in the meantime. So I hope you guys can sign up for our workshops. Feel free to go to that link, vitalhhic.org, where you'll get the registration link to sign up for our workshops. Email us if you have any questions, and our competition registration will open next week, and I hope to see you all there. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Elisa, for that quick rundown. And like she mentioned, we have a workshop with Scout next week, and the application opens next week as well, and it's in the chat. And then we also are resuming our digital health speaker series the week after, which also kind of relates back into our case competition. And these are all the dates for that. And again, they're all 6 to 7 p.m. on Thursdays. And thank you again to our panelists and to everyone for coming. We really appreciate it. And if you have any questions about VVC or HHIC, feel free to stay behind. We'll be happy to chat with you.